All right, recording
Awesome.
or live.
Okay, we live. All right, well, I'm going to start us off with some introductions. I'm Nikki Hatfield. I am the Black Student Union president, and today we are going to have a little meet and greet Q&A to give you some context as to why we're having these conversations. It's just because Black Student Union has recognized some systemic barriers, and what we've been advocating for is structural change and sustainability of our programs. We have seen that we get a lot of conversation, but we really want action around the conversation that we are having. We understand the rhetoric that the school has been pushing students first, and we really want that statement to be verbiage, not necessarily just something that we put on headlines. So to dive in, I'm Nikki.
Well, wait, Nikki. Yeah, we can introduce ourselves.
Yeah. I was just going to hand it off to you, actually. Yeah, go ahead, Kier.
Okay, my name is Kier Wilson. I'm the vice president of the BSU.
My name is Trillia Hargrove. I'm a member of the BSU, and also I just want to say, if anybody's talking, for long periods of time, hopefully we can just mute ourselves so there's no feedback. And also if we can keep the, we'll let you do your introduction first, 10, 15 minutes, whatever feels right to you, but also we're going to try to keep the answers to our questions around 5 minutes. And we have about an hour. So, and again, thank you so much for meeting us on a holiday, Jeanette. And if you want to introduce yourself or if you had something else to say, Nikki.
Sure, should I go? Cool. Thank you all so much for inviting me to chat with you. Sorry about that. It's bath time. Yeah, I'm excited to get to know you more and also just hear what you all are working on, what you have top of mind, what you're looking for to be changed at City College. I think that's the most important thing. And so I'm kind of just really excited to hear from you about your perspective and what you would like to see happen, generally at the university, at the school, but also from your trustees, right? Because the trustees play a critical role in making sure that the college is sustainable and is inclusive. So I'll first give you kind of like a little bit about my background and what's my deal, and then I look forward to just having a really good conversation with you. So I'm Jeanette Quick. I am running for City College, as you know. I am the daughter of a Vietnamese immigrant, and I have been a consumer protection attorney for the past 15 years or so. I was a senior advisor to 2 United States senators. During that time, I helped stand up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I conducted a number of investigations, including investigations into for-profit colleges and abusive student loan practices across the country. I wrote a lot of the laws in place to stop them. I'm also a current City College student, which makes me, I think, alone in the candidate suite to be taking City College classes. I've been taking classes for the past 3 years. I'm not full-time. I take usually between 1 and 3 classes a semester, but I have taken classes every single semester at different campuses and also online. And the reason I joined the race was really because of what I saw as a student and hearing stories from my classmates that were having their classes slashed kind of out from under them this past spring semester, and faculty getting slashed and the courses being eliminated that I thought were really important. So that's why I entered the race. I just completed my 3 years and I obtained my creative writing certificate. Oh my gosh, let me try to move. It's getting louder here. Sorry, I value lifelong learning. And I believe that City College is on a crash course to failure. And I think that someone needs to do something about it. And it's also not serving either its students or faculty very well right now. And there's not enough focus on how to bring holistic services to the people of San Francisco. I believe quality education is critical to ensuring that everybody has a fair chance. Community college was key to my own success story. I first started going to community college when I was 16 years old, growing up in Southern California. And I ended up earning enough credits to UC Berkeley to go there when I was 16 years old. So I believe that community college is critical to the success of so many people. And I want everyone to be able to have the same opportunities and quality education that I received in another district. And I am worried that San Francisco and City College is not providing that as much as it should be. So as we know, as you all know, especially as students, City College was in a death spiral even before the pandemic. It is at risk of losing its accreditation yet again. And I think that, as we know that the city and state funding is going to become even more unstable during COVID. So I think we need to think outside the box, shake up what we're doing, and not keep electing the same people over and over again, and doing the same thing that we've been doing in the past. We need an independent voice to increase public accountability. In the Senate, I personally reviewed the budgets for 7 federal agencies and held them accountable for how they spent their money. I will do the same at City College. I don't work for the city, I never have. I will look at the numbers and call it as I see it and be an independent voice for students and for faculty and for cleaning up the budget. I also think that, part of what people talk about when they're talking about cleaning up the budget is most candidates talk about how do we get more city, state, and local funding, which I do think is important, and I will focus on that as well. But I also think we need to figure out how do we get more money in from the private sector. We need to engage with the private sector as a community, both by creating new workforce pipelines so that companies hire City College students, and create some partnerships to benefit City College. I work in the tech industry, and I can bring the tech community and the college together in a way that has never been done before. I run a financial group that includes 100 companies. I've built government advocacy at 2 companies, and I recently got more than $2.5 billion of government funding for the small businesses that work with my company. So I really think it's important to be shoring up the private partnerships for City College to be able to provide more resources to Black, Brown, LGBT, and historically underserved communities at City College. I think a huge part of that is making sure the funding is stabilized. And above all, I do think that we need financial oversight experience to get City College back on track. So thank you for letting me talk more about my background to you, and yeah, look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Right on. That was an awesome introduction.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of good things out of your intro. Diving into our first question, though, what's something you believe earlier in your career but think about differently now?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for sending that question over earlier. So I had a little time to think about that, and I had so many different things I thought about. Because there are so many, I've been out of law school about 15 years, as I said, and there are so many things that, for example, like I thought that banking law was a certain way, and then it wasn't, it's more nuanced than I expected. And there's all these things I could say, but I think that's not really what I want to focus on. I want to focus on more kind of like the things that I learned career-wise. And one of those is, I think that I thought early on in my career as a lawyer that the world was much more of a meritocracy than it is, and that, okay, I would work hard and people would recognize it and I would get ahead and get promoted because people would say you deserved it and you worked your ass off, right? That's what I thought very naively when I graduated. And I realized that the world doesn't work that way quite often, right? Like, especially for women, especially for minorities. And that you really have to advocate for yourself. And that was something that wasn't like, I would say wasn't kind of like a natural comfort zone for me for many years. Well, one, I was just like a kind of a shy person generally. I was also brought up, in a, with a kind of like Asian community that the culturally, it was a little bit more like, I wasn't supposed to kind of stick out or raise my hand. It was more like, kind of wait for someone to recognize you. And so that was something that was really hard for me to kind of get out of my own head, get out of my comfort zone, get out of, in many ways, what I thought was like the way that I was brought up. Because I think over the years, I realized in looking around, the people that were getting ahead and getting promoted were often, some of them were competent. It's not like people were only incompetent, but some of them were, it was just that they were advocating a lot more for themselves. They were getting out there, they were meeting all these people. And the other thing that I myself, but also get keyed in with other, try to get mentors, but also try to mentor other people on the back end, so now that I've been out for a little while and I feel like I have had some amount of success, I think it's so important to try to go backwards and figure out, okay, well, how do I plug in to the community college scene? How do I plug into high schools or people trying to get into, you know, tech, like tech incubator type organizations, and help people navigate and think through things that, like, I had no clue, you know, that so much of the world is just about networking and who you know. Like, I kind of knew, like, because it's, you know, that's what people tell you, but it didn't really like sink in, I think, until I was a little bit older.
Yeah, you start putting it into practice and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
For sure. I totally hear that. Thank you for answering that. I'm gonna hand it off to Trill so you can ask our second question.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. That was really good. So number 2, do you have a background in educational equity? And if so, please tell us about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as part of my work on the for-profit colleges and student loan issues, so in particular for student loans, we looked at who like kind of takes the loans, like, and how the distribution is between federal and private loans, what the interest rates are, how student loan servicers treat people that have student loan debt. So in those contexts, I did a lot of focusing on like racial and socioeconomic disparities between those situations, and particularly in the for-profit college context, that was particularly egregious as far as like racial breakdown and equity of how for-profit colleges are marketed to different demographics, and the graduation rates and the student loan debt that people end up with, and the quality of the education. I mean, this was just like crazy stuff, you know, where you see that, you know, people would be misled about what they were actually signing up for. You know, they'd sign a piece of paper and it would say, oh, you know, secretly, basically, like, it would say that they had taken out all these loans, but they didn't even realize they'd taken out the loans. They'd show up for class and like, there's no teacher and there's like no one in the classroom, right? Like, just insane stuff that like you can't even believe happens. And it happened a lot more to Black and brown people than it did to white people. And this is very disturbing. And I think this was, I mean, I was, happy to see that under the Obama administration that they shut some of these colleges down. But you know, during this current administration, the Department of Education secretary like came from a for-profit college, right? Like, that was what she ran. And so all of the, I mean, not all of it, but much of the work that we've done has been, you know, has been decimated. So, so a lot of my work thinking about equity has been on that side. So for-profit schools, how has that been unevenly distributed to different communities? And then on the lending side, which I touched on, we also did some research and investigations into how student loans, generally, especially private student loans, are unevenly distributed across minority categories and white communities. And, you know, that it tends to be that the white students are able to get loans at lower interest rates in the private sector market than Black students are. And so this was something that we tried to do something about when I was working in the Senate. Yeah, so I don't have as much experience in like kind of higher ed directly as far as like campus equity and things like that. But I've thought a lot about equity from a financial services and the structure of the schools lens.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Jeanette, what was the solution to the interest rates? Is there a solution, like was a bill written, or is it still in the process of being fixed?
Yeah, one of the things that that we did, so there's something called the CARD Act that was passed in 2010 that prevented, it just like straight out banned some like financial institutions from marketing credit cards on campus, which was a big problem at the time and had been impacting minorities more than white students. I think that on the question of just general private student loans, it's definitely still an open question. I mean, there were things that we tried to do kind of informally where we asked for demographic information about where the private student loans were going, because that is not information that is required to be gathered by the financial institutions right now. And so we linked up with Representative Maxine Waters' ideas around that, like, it needs to be required that information about who the private lenders are lending to needs to be transparent and collected. Similar to, she also has proposals about small business lending. Like, small business lending is another idea that, you know, it's kind of like there's not a lot of transparency about how the financial institutions are lending to individuals. So the first step is just like really just trying to gather the information and make it public and transparent, and then require additional information. But there are, I mean, I don't want to, I know this is like way too in the like weeds for this call, but there are some enforcement actions that we also worked with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who part of what they could do is enforce the fair lending laws. So Equal Credit Opportunity Act requires financial institutions to do disparate impact testing to see whether the people that they lend to are being harmed in a disparate way that's different across demographic groups. And so, yeah, it's financial institutions will sometimes say, well, we can't do the testing because we don't have the information. So what they're supposed to do is test against like zip codes and test against certain proxy methodologies. So there were enforcement actions that the CFPB took that we worked with them on against some of this activity. But.
Yeah. And we totally feel you on the whole, like fighting for the transparency and trying to get financial institutions to really be open and honest about the way their practices are happening. We do that all the time when it comes to the institution at City. Like we still don't have answers for a lot of the questions that we've been asking since before even COVID hit, you know, and that is one of the reasons we are starting to do these Q&As, is because we really want someone that whoever becomes trustee can be super transparent. And one thing that really sounds really good is the fact that you have the knowledge around numbers, and you say clean up the budget, because you said that we're almost in an accreditation crisis again, and that is ridiculous because we've been there before. So with all these experts, it just seems like we just need someone that really understands the financial issues. And we know it can't be cleaned up by one person. It's going to take collective, you know, work, but we need someone that's willing to do it, you know? But going into our third question, so just to give you a little bit of context. Okay, so when we talk about strategy to rectify, well, let me ask the question first. What is your strategy to rectify the harm in education in regards to Black students? And the context of harm is bad policy, underrepresentation, and underfunded programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that a huge part of this is getting the funding, you know, sorted out to make sure that there is enough funding. But even barring that, right? Like I think that there is a lot more that needs to be done with the funding that already exists to provide more to Black students, to the resource centers, to the to the student groups like yourselves, right? Like that there. I liked the way that you presented the information about your asks about how there needs to be more like holistic Black student services, not just like a resource group and then the other services, but it should be all under one umbrella. I think that's absolutely needed. I think also I would advocate for there to be just more like targeted support for Black students to make sure that they kind of stay on track and know what the requirements are for graduation. I think the fact that there's, you know, very low graduation rates for Black students is kind of symbolic of the fact that there's something else going on, right? Like that maybe, you know, there's more to be done on, hey, what do you need to do to graduate? Or is there something else going on in your life that you need support with? Do you need more resources? Is there, you know, are you having trouble getting to school, right? Like, is there more that we should be doing? So it's kind of like wraparound holistic services. So some of it is targeted outreach to Black students, but it's also how do we then figure out the underlying issues? Like if it's a transportation issue, if it's internet or laptop access issues, if it's just simply like, oh, I don't know, you know, what I need to do to graduate. Like there's all different kinds of solutions, I think, for each of those underlying reasons why not enough Black students are graduating. But then there's also, how do we make sure that people understand why is City College even relevant for their lives in the first place, right? Like, and that I think is a big issue, is as City Colleges is enrolling fewer and fewer people every semester and offering fewer and fewer classes, it's kind of like this vicious cycle where you're like, okay, this thing sucks, right? Like this college is not for me. You know, and part of that, I think, is, you know, having barely any classes at the Bayview Hunters Point location, right? Like, that is like this cycle where you're like, okay, well, this doesn't seem like it's for me. I'm not going to look at it. I'm not, like, it's not even on people's radar, right? That it's going to be helpful for their lives. And so I think, like, even before we get into some of this, like, how do we help the students already there? It's also like, how do we help people understand that aren't students, like, hey, there's actually value here for me. There's a pipeline. This can help me get a job. This can help me transfer. Like, how do we actually get there in the first place, right? So I think there's a lot to be invested in that part of it. And so I also really like that you put, you know, hey, we need to, like, figure out how to link in with the high schools, you know, because the high schools are going to be that pipeline where people aren't going to just go to city college if they don't know what it is, right? Like, or if what they know is negative. So it's either like they don't know what it is or they know negative stuff. Like, that's a big problem. So yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Also, before I ask the next question, I just wanted to make sure that nobody else is anybody from your team or anybody that you know planning on joining us, Jeanette?
Nope, it's just me.
Okay.
I'm a one-person shop.
That's okay. That's great. Just making sure. So for number 4, are you familiar with or aware of the Affirmative Action Taskforce and their mission to instate a full-time Black faculty member for the African American Studies Department?
Mm-hmm. I'm aware of it, but I haven't really heard much about it or what it's up to, right? And so I think this is part of, I think, what my critique of it would be, is that it's not visible. You can't really find, you know, what's going on with it online very much. So you kind of have to be involved with it directly to know what it's doing, which is not something that I think is helpful for the college as a whole, or for the trustees, frankly, too, if it's, you know, if it's not visible. And so I think that there is room and opportunity for that task force to be more visible, to put out more information about what it's doing, what its goals are. I mean, similar to what I think the trustees and the administration should be doing, is they should be transparent and public about what their goals are, and then hold themselves to accountability timelines. Because, I mean, one of the biggest, like, things, if you look at City College's website, like, it's really hard to figure out what the hell's going on, right? Like, you know, where is the budget shortfall? How many people are actually like, kind of, well, even like graduating, but like how many people are enrolled in different programs? Like, all these things are super hard to find on anything related to the website. And I think the same goes with Affirmative Action Task Force. I 100% support there being, well, generally just more diverse faculty. The ratios of Black faculty to white faculty is insane, right? Like, there's not enough diversity, not just Black faculty, but brown faculty, Asian faculty, right? Like, the majority is white, and many people have been around for a very long time. And I'm not necessarily in support of kind of like laying off any teachers, but I also do think that there needs to be in new hiring, you know, specific hiring of Black faculty. And so I would definitely support that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought how, like, I've been in quite a few, or, well, not quite a few, but I've been in some of the Affirmative Action Task Force meetings, and I really appreciate what they're saying, what they're advocating for. But one, it's very hard for them to, like, get their message out because the school itself isn't very transparent, but there can be a lot of outreach. So students they know they can be in those meetings, and other people know they can be in those meetings, so they can at least hear what's going on. Yeah, but there are some YouTube videos if you want to learn more, especially in regards to the African American Studies Department.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, thank you for that answer. I will pass it off to Nikki.
Yeah, I really like that idea of an accountability timeline, where if that was on our website, that would totally help out with so many, like, transparency issues. That needs to be said somewhere else, like maybe at a board meeting. But okay, going into our 5th question, it's really quick. Have you taken any classes in African American Studies?
I have not. Well, I have not at City College. I have taken mostly creative writing and art history classes. This last semester I also took a theater arts class. I did take an independent studies class that was called American, oh gosh, I think it was called American Cultural Heritage this last spring, and it was a mix of film, literature, and kind of like plays, and it focused on the African American experience as well as the Muslim American experience and the Asian American experience, kind of like in three different kind of like quadrants of the, not quadrants, that means four, three different parts of the class. So that one was not particular to the African American history, but it did have, you know, a third of the class was about African American history. I also, when I was in college, I took like a cultural identity course at UC Berkeley that also touched on African American history as well.
Awesome. It's good to hear.
Yeah,
All
nice.
right, handing it back over to you, Trill.
All right. So, can you identify any funds in the school budget meant for Black students? If so, tell us what type of fund and how to access it. And this could include like allocations of funds meant explicitly for Black students or Black faculty. Do you know any about any scholarships? Because sometimes these things are really hard to find, and this is a great place to like share, especially since this is for our constituents, our students, you know, and making sure that these are things that are available to you if you have any knowledge of any resource. We're sharing the knowledge, you know.
Yeah. So I hope to get the knowledge as a trustee. I do not have the knowledge as an outsider. I have looked at the budget. I think that the budget is very non-transparent as to what is allocated to whom. And I think that's would be one of my goals is, you know, kind of transparency of the budget and transparency of resources available, and having them very like specifically in like easy to understand way laid out, not just for Black students, for really like any student, like, hey, here's like all the scholarships, and here's how, you know, there's different pools of money that are available for different things. Versus like, I you know, I know as a student right now, I get these like very like scattered one-off emails where it's like, hey, by the way, there's like a $500 scholarship grant deadline. You know, you just like periodically get that dropped in your email every like 2 or 3 months. But it's not like holistic. It doesn't target individuals to kind of make sure that, you know, you can kind of self-identify, hey, actually, like I'm LGBT, is there anything for me? Like there's nothing that does that, right? Like, and so I think that is a problem. I'm sure that the incumbents probably have better answers on this because they have more visibility into it. I hope they've given you good resources and like direction as to how to direct, you know, your members of your organization where to find that funding for themselves, because I think it's super important, and I hope that they were able to do that. But yeah, I don't have much visibility into that.
All right. Well, thank you. I think actually that made me think about how important, you know, resource and retention centers really are, because that is a perfect place for the scholarships to go, and then they are able to tell all the students that they serve. But unfortunately, not all of the students either utilize or even know about the resource centers. Because I know for my first semester, I wasn't aware of all of the things that were available to me, or I felt weird about going in there or something.
Yeah.
But thank you for that answer, Nikki.
All right, going into our question 7. Can you tell us how much money is in the budget reserves? Would you use this money to support Black students? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I know that the reserves have dipped below the 5% that's required to keep the accreditation. I would have to get back to you on the exact numbers. I wasn't prepared for all the exact budget questions, so I'm happy to kind of come back to you with exact numbers if you'd like. Certainly I would, if I were a trustee, would have those numbers more top of mind, but I'm happy to try to investigate that number for you about the reserves. I do know that they have, you know, the reserves have dipped below the number needed, and that there was a $14 million shortfall this 2020 year for the first time, and you know the budget deficit is growing every year. So I do think that there should be some of that is allocated to Black students, as I mentioned before. I think buttressing the resource centers, I think an obvious thing also to the last point that was made, which is that the resource centers, I think, are super helpful, but helpful insofar as you know about them, right? And so there's probably, I think, more outreach that needs to be done to make people understand what they are and that they exist, but also in updating and making more useful their online site, right? Because I think generally the City College online experience is not very good. I know that there was a recent revamp of the website, which made it somewhat better, but I still think that there's a lot of information that's super outdated. I mean, like if you look at the campus police site, it's got like stuff from 2012 is like the last time it was updated, which is insane. And similarly, I think myself personally, like I'm very uncomfortable going into places in person, like not even COVID, like forget COVID, even before COVID, I wouldn't have gone into a resource center as a college student, right? Like I just like am intimidated. I just like, it's like, I don't know what it is, or maybe I don't have time, or just like, it's just like, it's not something that I personally am comfortable with or was comfortable as a student. So that's why I think like it's super important for this stuff to be online so people can kind of hear about it, go to it on their own time, figure out all the information there, and then maybe they can go in or, ask, call a phone number if they have questions. But it's just so important to have this stuff like available for people online where you kind of like meet them where they're comfortable, and not like, it's not like people have to be forced to go in person. So that's one thing, but I mean, I think there's just so much more that should be done for Black students. I mean, I don't want to kind of rehash what I all just said before, but I mean, I think going into the high school pipeline, trying to understand, if in the communities, why aren't more Black people in San Francisco enrolling that are like in high school age or older? Why aren't they enrolling? Like, what do people think about City College? Is it like seen as like a good value or good place to go? And if not, like, we need to address that. And so I think even just like going out and just surveying and trying to understand what is the perception and how has City College failed the Black community in San Francisco? I think that's like a #1 thing.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate
yeah. Thank you. That was a really good answer. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a slide now. Hopefully this works. But the next question is, what is your strategy? And I think you kind of answered this a little bit, but what is your strategy in regards to Black Student Union demands? And for those who don't know, our demands are, but are not limited to, can everybody see that? Can everybody see? Am I sharing my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I can read if that would be also helpful. So the first one, to have a unified Black space and presence that connects all of the resource centers, AFAM, Studies Department, and Black Student Union. Number 2, networking with high school so we can promote ourselves to potential CCSF students. This encourages longevity and circulation of students into the BSU so we can continue its legacy. Making sure that Black programs and resources are given the proper visibility by CCSF. Number 4, advocating for adequate funding for the African American Resource Center. And number 5, an African American Studies Associate of the Arts degree that can be used for transferring, which we don't have currently.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of for more info, you can find it on our Instagram.
Yeah, so I was so excited to read these. I think these are awesome and super like targeted. Like I think I love the content of them, but I also love that you're very specific in what you're asking for, which I think is more effective in having people listen to you and make real change. So just like kudos on like your approach to how you even came up with presenting the goals. But I also think that the content of what you put in there is so important, and absolutely 100% support every single thing you put in there. And I think I was reading these things and was like, oh my God, like this is like common sense, right? Like it's kind of, it's so fascinating to me that like this, like none of this stuff exists yet, right? Because you read these things and it seems like, wow, this is like very moderate asks, right? Like these aren't like things that should be outside the realm of the possible, right? Like I think creating a resource center that's united, that not even a resource center, creating a Black space that pulls together all of these different resources together makes a lot of sense, and it just feels like it makes each of those individual like items, the Resource Center, AFAM Studies, Black Student Union Umoja, like it makes each of those more effective to be unified under one umbrella, and I think then can advocate for additional funding, visibility, and just kind of resources, and making it more of like a powerhouse, right? Like that this is something that is unified. I think it makes a lot of sense. I also like the networking with high schools, 100%. I mean, as I mentioned, I think making sure to bring the visibility of City College and the value of City College to high school students is really important. And I think I would also encourage you to just add kind of like further on the journey, right? So bring also City College to universities, and strengthen that pipeline, right? And strengthen the pipeline of City College to all the private companies in our backyard. I mean, one of my biggest kind of like things that I'm thinking about these days is how to strengthen that private sector City College pipeline. Like, it's insane to me also that we're literally living in like the wealthiest city in America with the biggest, wealthiest companies in America. And yet we have City College in our backyard that is on the brink of failure, is barely graduating most of its students. And many people that are graduating don't have anywhere to work, right? Like, that's kind of like, it's just shocking, especially when you think about how many of these big companies put out stuff about how they support racial justice, and they're donating millions of dollars to other causes, and they should be donating money to City College. And so I think there's a little bit of like, hey, we could kind of like name and shame them a little bit. Like, hey, what about City College? Like, you're literally here, in this city. And here's a really easy way for you to help racial justice issues. And so I think that's super important, and would encourage you to add that also, like, that it's the high school pipeline, super important, 100%. But there's also the pipeline on the back end after, like, what's life after City College. And then I think the visibility, I mean, that visibility point that you have on your goals is, I think is so related also to that unified Black space message, right? Which I think once, it's kind of like hand in hand, once the space is unified and there's more resourcing for the programs that are under the Black space umbrella, that is like an opportunity to, to bring visibility to Black programs and to create more interest, more credibility, more just kind of like high visibility into it. And I think, I don't know what like the history of it is of trying to create the African American Studies associate's degree, but I think that also makes a lot of sense. There's
there is no degree for African American.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like that. Like, I don't know if like that's been advocated for in the past. Actually, I would love to know more. Is that how has that gone? Like, or has it not been like a subject of debate?
So they don't have any full-time Black faculty that are within the African American Studies department. Mm-hmm. So in order to build that curriculum or build that degree, that person would need to get paid for it, but they haven't set aside the funds for that professor, mm-hmm. whether it's, whoever that may be, mm-hmm. They haven't invested in it. That's just the bottom line. Yeah. And if we do get the Black faculty hired, that person will be taking up that cost to handle that degree and then making that available to students.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's it's surprising that it doesn't exist, and that there hasn't been any support for that in the past.
Yeah, everyone says that. Yeah. Like, when they see our goals, they be like, "This is like bare minimum."
Yeah,
this is very like not controversial.
Yeah, exactly.
Not asking people to reimagine something. You know what I mean? Like something that is just not bare minimum investment. So that way, when we look at the statistics and the disparities, we're not like, why? Yeah. We know why. You know, it's like we all have these answers. Yeah. Now it's really just about what lever needs to be pulled. Yeah. And that is something I'm looking for in like the next trustee. Like, you know which lever to
Yeah.
pull, man. So that way that structural sustainability happens. But so far, this has been a great conversation. Going into our second to last question, question number 9. What makes you different in this race?
So a couple things. One is I am in the private sector and I have a lot of private sector relationships. So I think that many of the trustees have good experience, right? Many of the candidates have good experience, but the majority of their experience is with city politics. And I think that is valuable, right? Don't get me wrong. I think that there are, ways in which, of course, it is helpful for there to be relationships with supervisors or the mayor, et cetera. But it doesn't need to be that all of them have that experience, right? Like it's kind of like it's, a law of diminishing returns. You don't need like 8 people that worked for the mayor, right? Like you only need 1. Similarly with different supervisors. So I think that I bring a diversity from background standpoint to anyone else on the candidate slate. I'm in the private sector. I also am the only one that has a lot of financial management experience. Most of the other candidates are like I said, are really kind of like city legislative people who have not worked in the private sector with a budget where you have to kind of figure out how to balance the budget, how to allocate resources, and haven't worked with large organizations. And so I think that's something that I really bring to the table. I've been thinking about financial policy issues for a really long time. Like I said, for 15 years, I've thought a lot about consumer protection and student rights also, and how to protect people and how to make sure that as you're making those hard decisions about budgets, you're also balancing, the rights of people and how to make sure it's good experience. It's not just like okay, now we just slash this and this and this. Like you have to listen to stakeholders. You have to survey people. You have to be transparent about what you're doing and bring people along for the ride. And I'll be honest, like I think that the budget is in a really bad state. And is it possible that some stuff will have to get cut in the next few years? Absolutely. But I think that the way that they have done this in the last couple years is horrible, right? Like where it's people have already signed up for school, they already have their schedule, and all of a sudden, like surprise, January like 15th, like your classes are all gone, and like you thought you were going to transfer, well now you can't, right? Like that's ridiculous. Like that's not the college experience anybody should have or teachers should have. And so I think I will always aim to be very transparent and map out exactly what I'm thinking and listen to stakeholders and input. So that's my big differentiator is kind of having this private sector experience and also just the financial management experience. But a third thing also is that I'm the only one that's a student right now. I know a couple of the other candidates have gone in the past, years and years ago, and have taken classes in the past, but I've been, the last 3 years taking classes. I've been going in person, I've been taking online classes. I know that freaking RAM ID sucks ass. Like, I know that like, there's just like, the Canvas site is hard to use. The online courses are hard to use. Like, I've used the computer labs and tried to use the Dell computer that is inside the computer lab and have it just freeze constantly, right? Like, this is real stuff that like, I think is very difficult to figure out if you're just looking at this from the outside.
Thank you so much.
Totally.
Yeah. So for our last question, how are you committed? This may seem a little bit repetitive, but how are you committed to helping the African American Studies Department? And I think you kind of talked about that a little.
Yeah, so I think resourcing, number one, get more resourcing in there, both in the budget that already exists and the budget that I think we need to increase by getting more private funding and also getting more state, federal, and local funding. But also what we talked about before, which is making sure that there is a full-time faculty staff member that's hired. That is really top of mind. I think that the fact that there isn't one is it's just like not, it's like not providing a quality education to a lot of individuals that would be interested in taking that course of study. So I think hiring a Black faculty member, making sure that there's resources for the department, so that it's, you know, once the faculty member is hired, he or she is not just in a vacuum and doesn't have enough resources to actually be able to, you know, to kind of like create buzz about the program, or to create a website, or to create, you know, visibility amongst within the college that this program exists, right? Like it shouldn't just be like, you know, there's now a faculty member and, you know, no one knows about it kind of thing. So I think also having institutional support for the program is super important, which comes through resources, but I think it also comes through hiring a good chancellor who also prioritizes the African American Studies department. And I know we haven't touched a lot on the chancellor, but I think that's also an opportunity to hire somebody that is an advocate for African American Studies, understands the value, understands why the program should be at the college. And that would be something that would be something that should be asked for of any chancellor that is hired.
Thank you. Good answer.
Well, you got some plans for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really great to hear you from you.
Yeah, I appreciate you asked lots of really, really detailed and good questions. It makes me really excited to know that you're like thinking about the future of City College in this way. It's really like inspiring, and I think awesome that you're doing this.
Thank you.
It's really awesome you took the time out to meet with us. We are very looking forward to everyone that's coming out. We are like kind of nervous about who's going to show up and meet with us, but that also is going to be speak to them, right? Like feeling as though they didn't have the time. So little shout out there. We're still recording. I'm probably still editing until we stop. But yes, thank you for meeting with us. Is there anything you'd like to say before we conclude?
I think just thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you and to hear what's top of mind for you. I do think, you know, everything you've said is so important, and please reach out if you have other questions, or if you're, you know, curious about what I would think about anything. Would look forward to talking. And also, if I am a trustee, which I hope I am, would love to continue the dialogue and have like a very open channel between the student union and myself. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you, Jeanette.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. Happy Labor Day.
Yes, you too.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, you too.